So I'm going to cover a little bit about infiniMap, and then I'll hand it over to Jen because she wants to talk about the EXR trader. First thing I want to do is show you what are the things I've been working on that's kind of made my life easier with the infiniMap. So show I'm still working on. It's getting there, and this is an older shot. I've actually got an updated version of this rendering right now over the weekend. But that's actually an infiniMap Earth. So that's a 16K Earth map. So it's 16,000 pixels by 8,000. And normally you can't load anything like that into LightWave without all kinds of problems. And that moon is also 16,000 pixels. I did an earlier version with this thing with like an 8,000 pixel map, and you didn't have any edges anywhere on this thing. And even just putting a little slight curve down there and putting a moon map, you need a huge moon map to get any kind of detail for something like this. Because you might notice the camera's actually panning over this thing for a fair distance.
How many megs is that moon map?
This one's not too bad. I'll pull up the actual image for it. I got a NASA folder for my space stuff, which has my planets and my Earth. And yeah, here's a 21K Earth map that I've used for various shows like Animal Armageddon. There it is. Now, when I was doing Animal Armageddon, anytime I needed to look at a close-up section of the map, I would actually cut this image into quarters. So it's like I would say, oh, I just want this little section here, map it on a sphere, but I tile it twice each way. And I just make sure I don't go across the tile, otherwise you know it's like, gee, I just repeated over to North America again and again. And it's like, oh, you got North America down in the south too, which looks pretty weird. But yeah, with these 21K maps, it's not a very big file as a PNG. It's 17 megabytes. When I was making these things at 21K, I actually had a bunch of 80K maps that I was working with to grab the textures with, and I was making all the various periods. And Photoshop was making an 80 gig swap file. It actually made it out of 2 swap files because it ran out of memory for one. So these things take up a lot of room. I was hoping to have a 64K moon map to show you. Sorry. Yeah, Jen's still working on that. We've got a script that's actually taking all these little tiles and putting them together. It's been doing that for about 2 hours or so. And it's how many gigs you're running out of, Jen?
It required 48 gigs on the disk, and it's still building it, but I think it's going to be 16 gigabytes when it's done.
Yeah. Here's some of the other maps I got, like the moon map I was just showing you. Oh, they're over. That guy right there. But yeah, so this is the map I was just showing you on the moon. Actually, it's just larger than the map I showed you on the moon. I actually had this one. Oh yeah, I was going to say, I get these maps from a website called Celestia Motherlode. Celestia, for those that don't know, it's an astronomy program which lets you look at the universe from pretty much any point in time or space. I just run the little... Yeah. But it uses a method similar to what infiniMap does internally. So this is Celestia, which lets you look all over the universe. Cool. You can zoom in and out, rotate. Look at the Hubble, get information about everything you want, sync to the orbit. You've got like time controls, so you can say what date and everything here. But one of the things people like doing is making new high-res maps so you can actually zoom in on areas But as I said, it uses a method similar to what infiniMap uses, where it uses little tiles. It's like when you get a map for this thing, like a level 0 would be like a whole map in one image. Level 1 would be quarters. It'd be like, 2 tiles. Level 2 would be 4 tiles. And it breaks it down in little tiles of 512 pixels per side. So you get up to like level 4, that's a 16K. So you get a whole bunch of these little 512K or 512 pixel tiles. And putting those together in Photoshop takes hours. Because Photoshop, or it's like LightWave, doesn't load those images in directly. So you know. What's that? No, they're something called DDS, which is direct draw surface, and the other one is PNGs, is what they usually use for Celestia.
But they're tiles, they're folders of tiles.
Yeah.
And the tiles have column and row numbers in them.
Here we go. So this is a normal map, and this is the way you download the images. And this guy got a little bit fancy because the polar regions, he only made them half width, and then the larger ones he even made them quarter width. So that threw a little wrench into Jen's script that puts everything together, because suddenly these things weren't 512 by 512.
Luckily, ImageMagick has a way to stretch those guys to fit the same dimensions as the other guys. So I'm using the script that runs ImageMagick to do all the switching.
Yeah, so this is a level 3, which is probably like 8,000 pixel, but it's 120 images that you have to put together. And then as you get into larger ones, level 4 is 512, and it just keeps doubling. But anyway, that's the way the images come in, and that's similar to what infiniMap does. But infiniMap needs all these images as like a whole single file, and it only uses EXRs or JPEG 2000. And both of those formats are formats that LightWave really doesn't support natively all that well, especially JPEG 2000. It doesn't support that at all yet. No. So when you load those images in, you won't even see them in here. LightWave does support EXRs, but getting these formats into an EXR requires a commercial product, so you can actually save it out of Photoshop as an EXR. And you have to have an option called tiling turned on. I was talking to Michael Wolf about it, and there's a plugin from fnord called Super PNG, and they have a JPEG 2000 saver, which actually lets you specify the size of the tiles. And he says that for the fastest results in infiniMap, you set your tile size to 2048. I don't know if that's the best memory usage, but it's fastest for rendering. So I'm just going to load up a little scene here. Yeah, the nice little moon scene I just showed you. Now if you see this on the screen, I'm loading up an Earth low res, which is just using a low res like 5K map, I think it is on this one. So it's not using any infiniMap stuff. But my moon definitely is. It's got the 16K map there. So you look through this list, and there are no moon images. So I'll go to my surfaces. It's all nodal. This is one of the small drawbacks with infiniMap, is it's actually got to figure out what parts of the image to use. What it's doing is, because the JPEG 2000 format lets you use various tiles, it's only pulling out the little bits of the image that it's actually going to be using and just ignores the rest of it. So it's only partially reading the file. It's like I'm only using 1.22 gigabytes on here, and about half of that is just system overhead right now. Loading up one of these images in Photoshop would actually eat more than this. So there's my moon map, 16K JPEG 2000 format. Let's scroll ahead here. Come on. Got the wrong one. I'm just going to render the moon here. Yeah, a lot of times you'll notice that it seems to be a little bit slow when it starts off, and that's as it's looking at the geometry it's rendering, it's trying to figure out what parts of the image do I actually have to use. So it's got what it needed, but you know, it took 14 seconds. It should be a little bit faster now because it's already figured that part out. Well, 2 seconds shaved. I'm going to take the camera and actually I'm going to add a new camera here. So it's really similar to is just using a level of detail control on your images. Because the further away you get, the less detail it even has to bother bringing in. So I'm going to go back to frame 0. I'm going to close this. Oops, stop that. Yeah, it's not advisable to go shifting through the scene when you have the infiniMap stuff open, because it's constantly trying to update itself, which means reading the file over and over. So now we're a little bit faster here. I know it's taking a little longer here because now it's got to think, you know, which part of the image do I need for this angle. But once it's done its first pass, everything else just blazes through because it's got just what it needs in memory. So again, I'm using a 16K map and I'm showing about half of it here, so it takes a while to, you know, figure out what exactly is needed for this frame. I'm getting close.
Okay.
Yeah, I usually build everything with the intention I'm going to get close to this thing. It's just one of these lessons I've learned from production over the years. Whenever they say, oh, you're not going to get that close, you're getting right on it. So now it's rendering a little bit faster. It's picked up some of the stuff. Now if I was to stop and start the render again, it dives right into it. So it's already got all that stuff buffered. It'll just render that stuff as fast as possible, and now it's starting to figure out what it needs again. Now you can speed things up a little bit. infiniMap has a couple interesting little tools. Let's try that again, surface area. One of the tools in here is the texture quality. Notice I've got 100,000 set up in here right now. Found out you can actually put values over 100% and it gets even sharper. So right now I gotta wait for the little previews. I'm going to turn those off. It's still updating something in here. There. Come on. Go away.
Hey Dave.
Yep.
How much does disk speed affect any of this, since you are reading such big files?
Right now my hard drive's not doing anything.
But when it does that initial thinking and loading, is it?
It probably plays a good part of it. Okay, let's try this again. So one thing I learned is do not have VPR running when you're working with this, because it will take a long time. That. So again, you know, I've just changed the texture quality. Now it's going to be a little bit lower resolution, which means it's now digging up all the information again. But it's actually going through it a little bit quicker now. But what it's doing is for each area of the image, it's pulling out just a little bit of information. And, yeah, it's using like small internal tiles. So the areas that are really close to the camera, it'll use a larger tile, so you have a higher resolution section. But over a glancing angle over here, it'll actually use a smaller resolution version. It's a lot like the LightWave's internal MIP mapping, but a little more grand scale. And on animations, like especially on a shot like that where you're moving over the surface, as the area is coming closer to the camera, you can actually see the resolution change, and there'd be like a little edge. And he's got a little tool in here for level of detail blending, so it actually softens that edge as it comes in. Again, yeah, for speed, drop it down, but for quality, you bring it back up. So it's always that trade-off. If I do like a 10% here, you'll see a little bit of a difference in the map now.
So did you have to assemble all these tiles in Photoshop first?
And this one I did.
Then I found out.
Yeah. And she wrote a Python script to do it all.
Do you have to worry about blending the tiles together?
No, with Photoshop, they'll just snap together because they butt up perfectly to one another. But you just have to figure out, it's like, well, you got this so many tiles. I have to figure out how big that actual image is, and then just start dragging them over. And I do it with like one column at a time and work through it. But again, I did one of these things, and it was about half my day at work just putting these things together.
It's odd there's no script out there, but just saying it's so common.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just dropping the texture quality here. Now this is getting fairly soft. Not getting the same hard edges that I was getting before, but it's also rendering a lot faster. So if we go back to the other camera here, it's going to be a very blurry looking image now. It's still the same image, but it's just blurrier. Actually, I'm going to turn my normal maps off. You can see it a little bit better then. That's a pretty blurry moon. Bring this up to 100%. And there's actually sharp edges again. And because this is a node, you can also, use a texture to define where it's sharp and where it's blurry, so you can get kind of creative using something that this thing was designed to fix. He's got a few other utilities that come with this. First one, I'll just pull up here. Keep grabbing the wrong button. There's actually a layer. It's hidden in the procedurals. Oops. Go down here to, where is it? infiniMap. This is basically the same thing as the node. It's a little less powerful. So a few things that just don't work quite the same. But basically it's your whole image layer with just a few extra features, so you can do some image adjustments to it, brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, gamma. So you can do that right there in the image panel itself, which would be nice if this was a standard thing for a lot of the tools. Got options for making a preview that you can see in OpenGL. What that will do is actually create a small scale version of the image that you've got loaded, and you just save that as a PNG or JPEG, and it'll actually automatically apply it to the surface so you can see it. in OpenGL. I've used that a few times. The node does it as well. Everything else is pretty much the same thing as the image thing. Got your same tiling, UVs. UV offset is a nice little feature. So you can actually have everything mapped and then shift it over. And this is envelopable, so you can actually animate your UV mapped images over a surface. Let's see. When you get into nodes, you get a new one called ImageMagick, or the infiniMap normal mapper, and that's what I was using for doing my bumps. So I'm going to turn all the shading off, and I'm just going to use the normal mapper. It is a little bit slower than the regular image maps, but at least you can render the stuff. So I've run into a lot of problems where I'm rendering like an Earth map with a 10K map on the thing. And you get it back from the farm and only half your frames actually have the map. The rest of it just has like this blue ball sitting there. Oh, right, there we go. Yeah, the only problem that Mike's aware of with the normal mapper is there's no controls for controlling how deep the bumps are with a normal map. They're fixed. Whatever's in the image is what you're getting. So one of the things I've done is I actually blend it with a smooth normal, like just taking that from the spot info, and then I do a blend, and I can like shallow things out, doing like a 50-50 blend of the two. Going the other way is a little bit trickier because you start getting all these kinds of weird little errors. But usually with a normal map you don't have to worry about it too much. So it does take a little bit longer to set up, but again, once you've got it, you can get really close to these things and you're not going to lose any detail, and it doesn't take any more memory. Again, it's like, 1.2 gigs. If I was to actually just try to load one of those images, I'm going to close this thing because it's really getting in the way now. If I go to image editor, I'm going to try loading one of those big images. Images, NASA, space, planet, Earth, moon. Let's load in that 16K moon map. I know, it's got a couple of 5K maps. There it is. So I've got 4 of those 5K maps on the Earth to do that, and then I've got a cloud map which is 8K. So I'm using a fair amount of, like most of the scene is just images, and I got 2 balls and a bunch of cameras and stuff. So all these things are like 12 megabytes, 11. There's a big one at 32, 35, and then the moon at 384 megabytes. And you can actually see when I loaded it right there.
Well, you got the moon list on the list, but it looked like a Earth map.
Yeah, the moon is 16K. It's not going to display too well in here. But all the other guys that are nice and small, they will. It's just, I don't know if it's actually working on it. It doesn't look like it. But after, I think about 7K is really when it starts running into problems. It's usually with, if I had like large backdrops that around 7K, they start flickering on the farm. Some machines like them, sometimes they don't. Yeah, it could just also be down to network congestion too. He does have other tools that come along with infiniMap. He's got an infiniMap browser because you can't see the JPEG 2000s in the image viewer. But oh, there's a JPEG 2000 right there. There's my moon. There's that. And again, you can make your low-res previews and everything right here. You can replace images. It's like its own little image panel. You also have different ways of looking at this stuff. You can average, luminance, red, green, blue. And that's another thing that actually you can do with the surface, or the node editor for it. Keep grabbing the wrong one here. He's got various, like depending on the image you supply it, you can have the color, you can get like alpha. You can pick whatever layer you want, and with an EXR, you can get a whole list of stuff in there, so you can output different things. One of the things he does have that's a little bit different. If you look at this node, it's got a color output and an RGB output. There's no luminance value like you have with the image editor or image node. We have color, alpha, luma, and these are not the same. Luma is just the brightness of the image. The alpha is figured out internally for your opacity here. He's got his own alpha, which comes from the actual image, and normal and bump. But I really recommend using the normal from here because that's just doing the same thing as the image editor's bump output. The only difference here with color and RGB is the entire thing. You have a blending mode here, so you can actually have this blended with background color, and that gets output through the through the color output. The RGB is the raw color of the image itself, no blending or anything else done to it. Let's see what else can I cover. Oh yeah, he's got a couple other features in here. Go back to, you have a converter, so you can actually take some large format images and convert them to a format that infiniMap can use. So you can take like a large PNG, convert it to a JPEG 2000 or an EXR, but because of licensing restrictions, he can only do it up to 500 megabytes, which isn't a very big image. But you can just load in all your files, set it to a folder, and then just say, okay, convert, and you can, let's just add an image here. So you can do tiled EXR or JPEG 2000. You select your compression methods. Here's your tile size. He only goes up to 512 for EXR. Let's try JPEG 2000. Yeah, there's the limit. 500 megabytes cannot be converted. There we go. So just load any image here. Yeah, there's their super PNG. Gives you options to load as a separate channel, pre-multiply the thing. You'll do this on every PNG you load. Come on. I'll save that as. Okay, that's the Photoshop plugin. That's the Photoshop plugin. This is the fnord one. It's just J2K, JPEG 2000. You gotta say that. And it comes up with this nice little panel. Want to save it as a JP2. It's 8 bits of depth. You can actually pad it out to 16 or 32 or whatever you want. And here's your tile size, and Mike Wolf recommends 2048 for that. And leave it at lossless, otherwise you're going to get weird artifacts. And it usually comes in about a 10:1 compression, even when it's lossless. And depending on the image, it can be even smaller than that. But those are the settings that work for using infiniMap.